Hi. Today I'm going to be talking in my life legacy a little bit about my mom and my dad and their grandparents, or my grandparents, but I'm going to have to look at my notes because my memory's not that great, and some of this I have to rely on stories that I've heard. But I was born Patricia Ann Decoteau. That's Ann with an E. And Decoteau is a French name that came from my dad's side, and it's not spelled how it sounds, Decoteau, because it is French. It's spelled Descoteau. The S is silent. And growing up, that name got butchered all the time. Descoteau. What they wanted to keep pronouncing it like the state, Dakota. And it's just Decoteau. I had one teacher in high school, and he had a French name, and he knew exactly how to pronounce it. That was a one and only time. So some people that have that last name, Decoteau, had an X put on the end of it. That's also a French spelling of it. My dad was born March 25th, 1914. He was born in Lynn, Massachusetts. I think that's close to the border of Canada because they migrated, him and my grandmother's family migrated down from Quebec. There are a lot of Decoteaus in Lynn, Massachusetts. I found out from my brother Greg, and Decoteau name is quite common in Lynn, Massachusetts, kind of like the name Smith. It's just a very common name. And my grandmother, her name was Aurora, which is a beautiful name, and from the Sleeping Beauty story. That's the only time I've ever heard that name, but I remember my grandmother coming over. She had a real fox stole that when she came over to the house on Granger Avenue, she would put it in the front bedroom, and us kids would kind of steal in because it had a real stuffed fox head on it with glass eyes, and we would love to pet that head and touch the glass eyes. But anyway, her name was Aurora. I never knew grandfather Decoteau, never met him, never saw a picture of him. I think his name was Arthur. Never heard any stories about him at all. So I had no knowledge of him at all. My father's siblings, I grew up knowing my Auntie Norma. It's my father's name was Norman, her name was Norma. Uncle Al and Uncle Roland, I knew them. And he had a half-brother, Uncle Bob. I knew him, but I did not know he had another half-sibling, an Aunt Margaret. I don't remember her at all. So I guess my grandma Aurora must have been married a second time to have half-siblings. So again, I don't know of any other another grandfather of any sort. Never heard another story about that. Through my older sisters, they would know those stories, but never heard about those at all. And my father never spoke French in the home, even though we knew he had the French background. We would ask him sometimes as small children, speak to us in French. And he might say maybe a few words, but he was not fluent in French. And so he never really spoke it to us. And my father was not growing up in a house full of many children. Again, I come from a family of 12 children. He was not a demonstrative father. He was an alcoholic, but he also, I have good stories or good memories of my father when he would sing, play the guitar. Those are good memories, especially with Uncle Bob, who also played the guitar. I remember sitting around. Those were some good memories that we had. My father died in March, I think, maybe in the early 1970s. I don't recollect the exact year. I remember I was working in General Dynamics where my mom worked, and I remember the day that she came and told me that he had passed away. But that's on my father's side. On my mother's side, my mother is Phyllis Catherine Rounds, but she was born December 3rd, 1924. So there's 10 years difference between my father and my mother. She was born in San Diego, California. She was actually born Catherine Oakey Rounds, Oakey being the family name. And but her father's mother lived with them until she passed away. And when she was born the youngest of four girls. I guess her grandmother didn't like the name Catherine. She just started calling her Phyllis. And no one knew where she picked that name up. Never heard why she renamed her Phyllis. But she got renamed Phyllis, and everybody just started calling her Phyllis, and it became Phyllis Catherine Rounds. And in those days, there was no Social Security yet. So there was no Social Security numbers assigned or cards. And I think by the time my mom went to school and learned to write her name, she just started writing Phyllis Catherine Rounds. And whatever you wrote down, that's what people knew you by, and that's what they started calling you, even though on her birth certificate it was still technically Catherine Oakey Rounds. And when it came time to when Social Security became law and they started issuing the cards, she wrote down Phyllis Catherine Rounds as the name that they would issue her a number by. And that's what it became. And became her name the rest of her life. Her father's name, my grandfather Rounds' name was Eldon Rounds. My grandmother Rounds' name was Vera Rounds. And her siblings were my Aunt Jean, my Aunt Pat, whom I was named after, and my Aunt Eldine. And she just died, I think last year she got to be 101 years old. She was the archivist of the family history, and she was the last to go. And again, my mother died in May of 2004, and we all miss her very much. My father and mother married in 1941 when my mother was 17 and he was 27, that 10-year age difference. She was a beautiful woman, and they went on to have 12 children, me being number 7, right kind of in the middle. And that's about all I know. That's the short history of my mother and father.